They say while seeking revenge, dig 2 graves, one for your enemy, one for yourself. I was prepared to die. But first, I must kill the devil who murdered my husband in my presence. I rule an empire built on my husband's bones. The man who killed him. I spent 7 nights in his bed. And he never knew I was planning his execution. My name is Michelle. I am 30 years old, and I rule the Southern Empire with an iron will sheathed in velvet. I command 33 legions of werewolf warriors, their loyalty bought with victory and sealed with fear. But this empire, this power? It is a monument. A tombstone built on the vision of a dead man and the bones of my own innocence. I lost my virginity to him on the night of my 18th birthday, in the moon-drenched gardens of a palace that would later become my prison. Alistair. A king whose heart was as vast as his territories, whose mind saw decades into a future the rest of us could barely imagine. My husband. He built the foundation of this empire with dreams and diplomacy. I built the walls with betrayal and blood. For 8 years, I served not as a queen, but as a slave under the very table where we once planned our dynasty. My beautiful marriage was cut short 5 years in by a knife wielded by a smiling friend. This is not a story of a widow's grief. This is a story of a Luna's vengeance. This is how I redeemed my husband's name not with tears, but with fire. And it will shock you. Chapter 1, The Garden of Shadows. The scent of night-blooming jasmine was so thick in the air it felt like a physical touch, a lover's caress against my feverish skin. I was 18, and the world was a blur of music and laughter from the ballroom behind me, but out here, in the shadowed embrace of the royal gardens, there was only him. Alistair. Alpha King of the Southern Territories. 25 years old and already a legend. To his people, he was a giant, a warrior philosopher whose vision for a united empire was both revered and feared. To me, in that moment, he was just a man. A beautiful, terrifying man whose gaze held me more captive than any chain. "They'll miss you," he murmured, his voice a low rumble that vibrated deep in my chest. His thumb traced the line of my jaw, a touch so gentle it made my knees weak. "Let them," I breathed, the 2 words taking all my courage. The mating bond, fresh and electric since the moment we'd been introduced hours before, hummed between us like a plucked string. It was an ache, a pull, a promise of a completeness I had never known I was missing. He didn't smile. His expression was deadly serious, his storm-gray eyes searching mine. "This bond, it is everything to my kind, Michelle. It is absolute. It is forever. There is no going back. I don't want to go back." That was all the permission he needed. His kiss was not gentle. It was a claiming. A conquest. It was the seal on a treaty written in our very blood. The world fell away, the music, the distant stars, the future waiting in the wings. There was only the crush of his lips, the taste of wine on his tongue, the feel of his hands, calloused from swordplay, sliding down the silk of my dress to cup my hips and lift me against him. I gave myself to him there, against the cold stone of the garden wall, under a sky dusted with diamonds. There was pain, a sharp, bright burst that made me gasp into his mouth. But he swallowed the sound, holding me still, whispering my name like a prayer against my skin until the pain melted away, replaced by a building, coiling heat that threatened to unravel me. It was not just a physical joining. It was a merging. Through the bond, I felt the shocking depth of his love, a vast and terrifying ocean. I felt his awe that the moon had gifted him someone like me. I felt the immense weight of his crown, the countless worries he carried for his people, and the singular, shining hope that I represented, a partner, a equal, a sanctuary. Afterward, he held me as I trembled, his cloak wrapped around us both. He spoke not of passion, but of the future. His dream of a council of packs, united under a single banner of peace and prosperity. A legacy for our children. Our son will rule not just with strength, but with wisdom, he whispered into my hair, his breath warm. He will be the bridge between the old ways and the new. We will build this for him, Michelle. Together. 9 months later, I held that son in my arms. We named him Leo, for the lion-hearted King Alistair knew he would become. Our happiness was a perfect, fragile globe. We did not know then that the very future we were building would have a price too terrible to pay. Chapter 2, The Seer's Price. The change in Alistair was subtle at first. A distance in his eyes during council meetings. A lingering grip on my shoulder at night, as if to assure himself I was still there. The nightmares started a month after Leo's first birthday. He would wake drenched in a cold sweat, his heart hammering against my palm, a name on his lips, Caspian. Caspian. His beta. His most trusted friend since childhood. The wolf who had stood beside him in 100 battles. It's the same, he rasped one night, his face buried in my neck. Every time. We are in the grand hall, celebrating the harvest. Caspian is smiling, toasting me. Then, the wine. There's something in the wine. My strength leaves me. I fall. And he walks toward me. Not with a weapon. With a knife made of shadows. And he plunges it into my heart. And then he turns to you. He couldn't finish. The terror in his voice was a living thing. I soothed him, called it stress, the weight of kingship. But a cold dread had taken root in my own heart. He went to the High Seer, an ancient wolf who lived in a cave at the edge of the Whispering Woods. He returned hours later, his face ashen. It is not a prediction, he said, his voice hollow. It is a vision of a possible future. The most likely one. Caspian's ambition is a cancer. It has been festering for years, fed by his mother's whispers. He will betray us. He will kill me. And he will take everything. You. Leo. The throne. We'll exile him. Now. I cried, panic clawing at my throat. We have no proof but the dreams of a king, Alistair said, his voice terrifyingly calm. To move against him without it would fracture the pack. It would make me look paranoid, weak. It would start the very war I've spent my life trying to prevent. He took my hands, his grip firm. The seer showed me a path. A narrow, thorny path. It is the only way to save Leo. The plan was a masterpiece of brutal, heartbreaking strategy. We would fake Leo's death. A sudden, tragic childhood illness. The funeral would be public, a tiny casket lowered into the ground. But in truth, under cover of the deepest night, Alistair would take him to our most loyal allies in the far northern kingdom. He would be raised there, safe, unknown, until the time was right. And me? I asked, my voice breaking. What is my role in this thorny path? His eyes, full of a pain I could scarcely fathom, met mine. You must stay. You must mourn our son publicly. And you must convince Caspian, convince everyone, that you trust him implicitly. When the time comes, when he makes his move, you must be the one he sees as broken, defeated. Not a threat. You must survive, Michelle. You are the key. You are our only hope. The days that followed were a waking nightmare. We loved Leo with a desperate, aching intensity, knowing each kiss, each laugh, could be the last. The day of the fever, I held my screaming, healthy son as Alistair forced a tonic down his throat that would mimic death for precisely 36 hours. Watching that empty casket descend into the earth was the greatest acting performance of my life. My grief was real, it was for the life we were losing, for the innocence shattered. I collapsed, and it was Caspian who caught me. His face was a mask of perfect, sympathetic grief. He was like a son to me, Michelle, he whispered, his voice thick with false emotion. We will get through this. Together. I looked into the eyes of the man who, according to the future, would murder my husband, and I made myself believe him. I leaned into his comfort. I was naive. I was grieving. I was perfect. It was the first move in a game I didn't yet know how to play. And the cost of losing would be everything. Chapter 3, The Knife in the Sun. The betrayal did not come in the dark. It came at high noon, in the grand hall, drenched in sunlight. A year after we buried an empty grave, the palace had learned to breathe again. Alistair had thrown himself into his work, his vision for the United Council closer than ever. Caspian was ever at his side, the devoted beta, the supportive friend. I played my part, the grieving Luna slowly finding her strength, relying on Caspian's steady presence. The day of the strategic meeting with the neighboring Alpha, Caspian was the picture of efficiency. He tasted the wine himself before pouring Alistair's glass, a show of loyalty so blatant it makes me sick to remember. To new alliances, Caspian said, raising his own glass, a brilliant smile on his face. The other Alpha, a brutish wolf named Goran, echoed the toast. Alistair drank. I saw the moment it happened. A slight falter in his grip on the goblet. A flicker of confusion in his eyes. He set the cup down carefully, his knuckles white. Forgive me, he said, his voice slightly slurred. I feel unwell. Caspian was at his side in an instant. The stress, my king. Let me help you to your chambers. I moved to follow, but Caspian's look was a gentle, firm wall. Rest, Michelle. I have him. You've borne enough. The poison was slow-acting, subtle. It mimicked a wasting sickness. 4 weeks, Alistair faded. Healers were baffled. I never left his side, watching the strongest man I had ever known become a ghost. And through it all, Caspian was there. Managing the kingdom, a portrait of concerned exhaustion. I started to doubt the vision. Maybe it was just a sickness. Maybe I had misjudged him. Then, Alistair began to improve. The poison was leaving his system. Color returned to his cheeks. Hope, treacherous and bright, bloomed in my chest. That was their mistake. They couldn't let him recover. I had stepped out to fetch fresh broth. I returned to find the door to his chambers ajar. I heard a voice, Caspian's, but stripped of all its warmth, cold and sharp as a shard of ice. Should have taken the hint the poison gave you, Ollie. But you were always too stubborn. I froze, my blood turning to slush in my veins. Why? Alistair's voice was a ragged whisper. Your vision was too small, Caspian hissed. A council? Sharing power? You were a brilliant king, but you became a weak dreamer. This empire doesn't need a philosopher. It needs a conqueror. It needs me. I pushed the door open silently. The scene is burned into my memory, Caspian, leaning over the bed, a dagger made of polished obsidian, a ceremonial gift from Goran, in his hand. Alistair, too weak to even lift his arms. Their eyes met mine in the same instant. In Alistair's, I saw a final, devastating apology. In Caspian's, a flicker of surprise that hardened into pitiless resolve. I'm sorry you had to see this, Michelle, he said, and it was the truth that made it monstrous. He didn't look away from me as he plunged the dagger into my husband's heart. The sound was not a scream. It was the air leaving the world. Alistair's body arched once, then went still. The mating bond in my chest didn't break. It was sundered, torn violently in two, leaving a silent, screaming void that was worse than any pain. I didn't move. I couldn't. Caspian pulled the blade free, wiping it calmly on the bedsheet. He walked toward me, cupped my cheek. His hand was warm with my husband's blood. The king is dead, he said, his voice gentle, as if breaking terrible news. Killed by a feverish delirium, in his madness, he attacked me. I had no choice but to defend myself. You saw it, didn't you, my dear? You saw him try to kill his oldest friend. I looked from his lying eyes to my husband's still, beloved face. The greatest alpha king of his generation, murdered in his bed by the wolf he called brother. And I, his Luna, his key, his only hope, had delivered him to the knife by believing the lie. The scream, when it finally came, was not my own. It was the sound of my soul shattering. And Caspian smiled, because a broken Luna was no threat at all. He was wrong. It was in that moment, kneeling in my husband's blood, that the gentle Luna Michelle died. And the Empress of Thorns was born. Chapter 4, From Silk to Ash. The first time I was forced to scrub the floor where I once danced, I learned the true taste of hatred. It was metallic, like blood, and it kept me alive. The fall was not gradual, it was a precipice. Caspian's coronation was a week after he murdered my husband. He did not have the decency to wait for the mourning period to end. He stood where Alistair had stood, wearing crowns that did not belong to him, and spoke of a new strength for the empire. I was not invited. I was summoned. The throne room, once a place of light and strategy, was now a den of shadows and sycophants. Caspian lounged on my husband's throne, his new mate, Elara, preening on a smaller throne beside him. She was a sharp-faced, vicious woman from a minor noble family, her ambition a cheap perfume that couldn't mask her pettiness. Michelle, Caspian said, his voice echoing in the hushed hall. It was not a greeting. It was an announcement of a verdict. The kingdom is grateful for your service. But the time for a soft Luna is over. The pack needs to see strength in all its forms. Even in its humility. He gestured to a bucket of filthy, ice-cold water and a coarse bristled brush set at the foot of the dais. A dark, wine-colored stain, Alistair's stain, still marred the stone there, though someone had tried to scrub it away. You will start by cleaning your failure from this floor, he said, his smile benign. Let every wolf who comes to petition their new alpha see the price of weakness. A sound tore from my throat, half gasp, half sob. Elara's laughter was a sharp, tinkling bell of cruelty. Oh, do get to it. The stain is dreadfully stubborn. The walk to the bucket was the longest of my life. Every eye in the court was on me, some gleeful, some ashamed, all cowardly. My silk morning dress, the last remnant of my old life, whispered against the stone as I knelt. The water smelled of lye and vomit. I plunged my hands into it, the cold a shock that stole my breath. I grasped the brush, my soft, uncalloused fingers protesting against the splintered wood. And I scrubbed. I scrubbed at the shadow of my husband's life. I scrubbed as Elara made a show of dropping grape stems and spilling wine near my hands. I scrubbed until my knees were raw, my back screamed, and my tears mixed with the filthy water. But I did not scrub away the stain. I let it seep into me. I let the hatred crystallize around that dark mark on the stone, a cold, hard diamond in my soul. That was my first day. My new quarters were a closet in the servants' wing, reeking of damp and despair. My meals were slop scraped from the bottom of the pot. My body was no longer my own. It was a thing to be shoved, pinched, and leered at by guards loyal to Caspian. The physical labor was a perpetual agony. Hauling water, scrubbing latrines, mucking out the kennels. But it was the psychological torment that truly honed me. Ilara took a special, creative delight in my degradation. She once accidentally spilled an entire tureen of scalding soup down my back, then chastised me for being clumsy. On another occasion, she forced me to kneel for an hour while she and her ladies debated which of my jewels, my mating gifts from Alistair, suited her best. The ruby, I think, she'd mused, holding it to her throat. It matches the color of your king's blood on the stones, doesn't it, Michelle? The only thing that kept me from throwing myself from the battlements was memory. Not a fuzzy, warm nostalgia, but a sharp, specific recall I would torture myself with each night in my pallet of straw. The memory, erotica with emotional depth. It was the winter after Leo was born. A blizzard had locked the palace in a silent, white world. We had stolen an afternoon, just the two of us, in the royal chambers. A fire roared in the hearth, painting Alistair's skin in shades of gold and amber. He was tracing the new, silvery lines on my belly, his touch so reverent it made my breath catch. Map of my greatest treasure, he'd murmured, before leaning down to kiss each one. It started like that, tender, worshipful. His lips mapping every inch of me as if I were a sacred text. But then his mouth found mine, and the tenderness ignited into a familiar, consuming fire. He was still so careful of my body, but his need was a palpable force. I need to feel you, I had whispered, arching against him. All of you. I'm not made of glass. A groan ripped from him. You are my heart, Michelle. Holding you is like holding my own heart in my hands. Then let it beat against me, I'd said, pulling him down. The joining was slow and deep, a perfect, rocking rhythm that was about connection far more than release. Our foreheads pressed together, we moved as one, our breaths mingling. I could feel the love pouring from him through the bond, a golden, warm light that filled every part of me. When my climax came, it was not a sharp peak, but a slow, warm wave that washed through my entire body, pulling him with me. We lay tangled for a long time after, the only sounds the crackle of the fire and the beat of our hearts. End of memory. The memory was a blessing and a curse. It was the warmth that kept the ice in my soul from freezing me solid. But the return to reality, to the cold, the stench, the loneliness, was a fresh death every morning. I found a piece of charcoal in the kitchens. On stolen scraps of parchment, I began to write to my son. Letters he would never receive. A diary of my despair. My dearest Leo. Today I saw a bird with a broken wing. It hopped across the courtyard, a tiny, desperate thing. A guard crushed it under his boot without a second thought. I did not cry. I have no tears left for small cruelties. I save them for the large ones. I miss you. I fear you will never know how much. My lion heart. I was beaten today for dropping a plate. The pain is a dull echo. The shame is a sharper thing. Your father's eyes haunt me. I see them in my dreams, asking a question I cannot answer. Why did I not see the monster? Why did I trust? My son. They think they have broken me. They see a slave who flinches at raised voices. They do not see the fortress I am building inside my mind, stone by bloody stone. I am learning, Leo. From the cracks in the walls, I am learning everything. I will make them see. The letters were my confession and my battle plan. They were the only place I could be weak so that I could be strong everywhere else. And in the darkness, a network of silent loyalty began to form. An old cook would slip an extra piece of bread into my pocket. A grizzled stable master, who had taught Alistair to ride, would nod to me, his eyes full of a grim respect. A young scullery maid, whose family Caspian had ruined, would whisper fragments of gossip as we worked. They were my first, fragile army. The foundation of my thorned crown. And I, their broken queen, was learning to command from my knees. Chapter 5, The Whispering Network. In the palace's underbelly, secrets were the only currency, and I became its richest miser. Time ceased to have meaning in terms of days or weeks. It was measured in scars, in humiliations endured, in the slow, deliberate hardening of my heart. A year bled into 2, then 3. The vibrant young Luna was a ghost story, a cautionary tale told to new servants. I was the broken one, a fixture as much as the scullery stones I scrubbed. But inside, the fortress grew. Hatred was its mortar, and memory was its blueprint. My university was the palace itself. My curriculum was observation. I learned that the best secrets are traded not in shadowy corners, but in the open, disguised as mundane chatter. I learned to be invisible, a piece of furniture that heard everything. Lesson 1, The Architecture of Power. Scrubbing the floors of the war room after meetings, I learned the precise placement of the table, the chair Caspian favored, the distance to the door. I noted the loose floorboard near the hearth, where a careless minister might drop a sensitive scroll. I learned the patrol routes of the guards by the ache in my knees as I waited for them to pass. Lesson 2, The Language of Lies. Serving at the endless, debauched feasts Caspian held, I learned to read the twitch of a minister's eye, the forced laugh of a subordinate, the slight hesitation before a toast. I learned that Caspian's rule was not the solid monolith he presented. It was a fragile web of bribes, threats, and simmering resentment. His allies were loyal only to their own ambition. Lesson 3, The Economy of Loyalty. My silent army grew. It was not a grand conspiracy. It was a series of tiny, calculated transactions. To the cook, I offered the only thing I had left, dignity. I remembered her son's name, asked after his cough. She, in return, became my source of nourishment and the first filter for kitchen gossip. To the stable master, Old Man Hemlock, I offered respect. I spoke to him not as a slave to a free man, but as one soul who had loved Alistair to another. He, in return, became my eyes beyond the palace walls, telling me which messengers came and went in the dead of night. To the young scullery maid, Anya, I offered protection. I took the blame for a jar of honey she broke, absorbing the lash meant for her. Her loyalty became ferocious, absolute. She became my legs, my ears in the tight, servant-only spaces where even I could not go. My most valuable discovery was the palace's forgotten scriptorium, a dust-choked room filled with crumbling ledgers and historical records. Caspian, a brute who valued only the present, had ordered it sealed. But Anya found a warren of servant passages that led to a broken vent. There, by the sliver of moonlight fighting through grime, I educated myself. I devoured treatises on diplomacy, accounts of ancient wars, and dense economic texts. I studied the lineages, alliances, and bitter rivalries of the 17 clans that had betrayed us. I learned the art of the deal, the power of the unspoken threat, the delicate dance of offer and counteroffer. This was how I learned of the Leakin King of the North. Lysander. A ruler of immense, brutal power, but hemmed in by the very clans that now served Caspian. They paid him lip service but chafed under his demands, their true loyalty to whoever lined their pockets. Lysander's weakness was not military, it was political. He could not move against them without provocation. A plan, vast and audacious, began to form in the darkness. It was a house of cards on a windy ledge, but it was all I had. My letters to Leo changed. They were no longer just confessions of pain, they were training manuals, strategy sessions with a ghost. My son. Today I learned that a kingdom is not felled by a single axe blow, but by 1,000 termites, each chewing in the dark. I am becoming a termite. I study our enemies. Goran of the Blackwood clan is greedy but stupid. His lieutenant, a cunning wolf named Rorik, despises him. A wedge waits to be driven. Remember this. I think of you every day. I pray you are learning the art of war not just with a sword, but with your mind. We will need both. Sending them was an impossible risk. But old man Hemlock, his face grim with determination, had a brother who ran supplies north. For the price of my one remaining, hidden hairpin, a tiny silver wolf with emerald eyes, a gift from Alistair on Leo's birth, a dangerous pipeline was formed. Months would pass with no word. Then, a scrap of parchment would appear tucked into a loaf of bread. The handwriting, once a child's scrawl, became a man's strong, sure script. Mother. Your words find me. I understand. I learn. The Northern King is a hard man, but just. He sees my worth, not my name. I wait for your signal. Stay strong. L. The letter was unsigned, but the single initial was a bolt of lightning to my soul. He was alive. He was learning. He was waiting. Hope was a dangerous flame. It could warm you or burn you alive. I banked it carefully, deep inside the fortress of my mind. After 8 long years, I was no longer a mouse. I was a scholar of deceit, a general of the unseen, and my web of whispers was almost complete. I had mapped every crack in Caspian's foundation. I had identified every player on the board. I knew all their names. I knew all their sins. And I was finally ready to stop collecting secrets and start using them. The first move required the ultimate sacrifice. It required me to walk into the lion's den and make him believe I was a willing meal. Chapter 6, The 7-Night Sacrifice. I let my husband's killer trace the scars his men had given me, and called it passion. It was the greatest acting performance of my life. The plan was simple. Its execution was a descent into a special kind of hell. Caspian's vanity was his greatest weakness. He saw my brokenness as a testament to his power, but a part of him still craved the ultimate validation, the conquest of the one thing that had truly belonged to Alistair. Me. I began the campaign subtly. During my duties in the main hall, I would let my gaze linger on him for a fraction too long before dropping my eyes. When he passed, I would tremble, not just from fear, but from a feigned, breathless anticipation he would mistake for odd attraction. I used the oldest magic in the world, the illusion of a wounded bird seeking the protection of the hawk that had wounded it. It took weeks for the bait to be taken. One evening, as I was clearing the high table, his hand shot out and caught my wrist. His grip was like iron, but his thumb stroked my skin in a grotesque parody of tenderness. You look at me lately, Michelle, he murmured, his voice low enough that only I could hear. The scent of him, rich wine and arrogance, made my stomach turn. Do you see something you like? I made my lower lip tremble. I let my eyes well with tears that were 100% real, born of pure revulsion. I see, strength, I whispered, letting my voice break. I was not made for strength before. It frightens me. I let a single tear trace a path through the grime on my cheek. But it also intrigues me. It was the perfect cocktail of fear and fascination. His eyes darkened with possessive interest. He released me. Perhaps you will clean my chambers tonight. Personally. After the court has retired. It was not a request. That night, I entered the lion's den. His chambers. Their chambers. The room where Alistair and I had built our dreams now reeked of Caspian cigars and Alara's cloying perfume. He was alone, lounging in a chair, watching me. Clean, he commanded, a cruel smile playing on his lips. So I did. I scrubbed and polished the room that was a tomb for my old life. I made a show of it, letting the sweat dampen my thin shift, letting my body curve and stretch. Under his predatory gaze, I was performing a lewd ballet for my husband's murderer. After an hour, he rose. Enough. He walked toward me, a predator circling prey. He stopped behind me, his body not quite touching mine. I could feel the heat of him, the threat. You have scars, he observed, his fingers hovering over the raised, silvery lines on my shoulders from lashes his guards had given me. A reminder of my clumsiness, I breathed, locking every muscle in my body to keep from flinching. I find I like them, he whispered, his voice rough. They prove you are resilient. That you can survive intense pressure. His hand finally landed on my shoulder, and it took every ounce of my will not to vomit. This was the sacrifice. This was the price of the seals, the maps, the plans. I turned to face him, letting my eyes show not love, not desire, but a raw, desperate hunger for protection. For power by proxy. A thing he could understand. Show me, I pleaded, layering my voice with a shameless need I pulled from the deepest wells of my acting skill. Show me what real strength feels like. It was the key that unlocked everything. The 7 nights of sacrifice. Each night, after the palace slept, I went to him. Each night was a meticulously planned heist. Night 1, his kiss was a violation. His hands were rough, claiming. I dissociated, letting my mind retreat to a faraway place while my body performed its duty. As he snored afterward, spent and arrogant, I lay awake, my eyes scanning the room. I memorized the layout of his desk. The location of the first drawer. Target, the personal seal he used for informal missives. Night 2, he was more talkative, boasting about a trade deal with Goran's clan. I made encouraging sounds, feeding his ego. As he dressed in the morning, barking orders at a servant, my fingers slipped into the drawer. The small, heavy silver ring with the wolf's head crest was cold in my palm. I hid it in the fold of my ragged dress. First prize secured. Night 3, he was suspicious, having misplaced his seal. I soothed him, suggesting a servant had cleaned and misplaced it. They are all fools without me to guide them, I whispered, aligning myself with him. My reward was access to his map table. I committed the locations of his border patrols to memory. Night 4, I praised his strategic mind, asking him about the mighty armies that protected us. Drunk on wine and my false admiration, he unrolled a detailed military map, showing troop placements and the weak points of the northern Leakin King's territory. I burned the image into my brain. Second prize, strategic intelligence. Night 5, he gave me a goblet of wine. I drank it, knowing it might be drugged, a test of my loyalty. I focused on the memory of Alistair's face to keep my mind clear. When he was satisfied, he fell into a deep sleep. I found the key to his iron-bound chest hidden under a loose floorboard by the bed. Night 6, I used the key. In the chest were treaties with the other betrayer clans, Goran, Rorik, the others. Documents full of promises Caspian had no intention of keeping. I couldn't steal them, but I read them, absorbing the terms, the lies, the potential fractures. Third prize, the blueprint of his deceit. Night 7, the final night. He was in a foul mood. Ilera was suspicious, asking where he went at night. He took his anger out on me, his hands leaving bruises on my hips. I absorbed it, turning my pain into fuel. As he slept, I did not search for anything. I simply looked at him, the man who had murdered my love, stolen my life, and now believed he owned my body. The hatred was a cold, clean flame. I was done. In the morning, I left his chambers for the last time. Hidden in my dress were his personal seal and a folded scrap of parchment on which I'd inked a perfect copy of his official seal using ink and wax stolen from his desk. The final prize, the means to forge his commands. I went to the scullery, plunged my hands into the icy, filthy water, and scrubbed until my skin was raw. I was trying to scrub his scent off me, the memory of his touch, the feel of his breath on my neck. A wave of nausea and self-loathing finally overwhelmed me. I stumbled into a dark corner and retched, dry heaves racking my body. Tears of pure rage and shame finally came, hot and silent. I had done it. I had the tools to break him. But a part of me felt shattered in a new way, a way I feared might never be repaired. I thought of Alistair. Not the tender memory of our bed, but the fierce king, the strategist. What is one woman's honor weighed against the survival of an empire? I could almost hear him ask, his voice full of grim understanding. The move was correct, my love. The cost was necessary. It was the only thing that kept me from breaking entirely. The sacrifice was made. Now, it was time to collect. Chapter 7, The Unraveling. With a stolen seal and a forged letter, I didn't just send an army to its doom, I turned allies into a pack of rabid dogs, and locked them all in the same room. The tools of my vengeance lay before me on the rough-hewn wood of my palette, Caspian's personal seal, the forged impression of his official one, a scrap of precious parchment, and a stolen nub of ink. The plan was audacious. It was insane. It was the only way. Caspian's greatest weakness was the very alliance he had built on sand, the 17 clans bound by greed, not loyalty. My time in his bed had confirmed it. They whispered behind his back, each jealous of the others, each suspecting Caspian of favoring their rivals. I would not attack them. I would make them attack each other. Using the precise, formal language I had learned from the old scrolls in the scriptorium, I composed a letter. It was from Alpha Caspian to Alpha Goran, leader of the brutish Blackwood clan. Caspian's voice flowed from my charcoal, a perfect mimicry of arrogant command. The time has come. Rorik of the Stone Fangs has overstepped. His ambition threatens us all. Move your forces to the sunken gorge at dawn in 3 days' time. Await my signal to ambush his patrol. Leave no survivors. The spoils of his territory will be yours. It was a masterpiece of provocation. It played on Goran's greed, the promise of territory, and his stupidity, a simple, direct order. I pressed the forged official seal into the hot wax I'd begged from the cook. It was perfect. Next, a second letter. To Rorik, the cunning lieutenant who despised Goran. This one was more subtle, playing on his paranoia and intelligence. My trusted Rorik, my faith in you is proven. Goran plots treason. He moves to ambush you at the sunken gorge. Gather your forces. Strike first. Prove your loyalty and your strength, and the Blackwood clan will be your reward. This one I signed with Caspian's personal seal, the ultimate sign of intimate trust. Rorik would believe it utterly. Old Man Hemlock's network swung into action. 2 loyal stable boys, their hearts burning with secret loyalty to Alistair's memory, were sent out on errands. The letters found their way into the hands of messengers who asked no questions, their palms silvered by coins from a stash I'd slowly pilfered from Caspian's own coffers over 7 nights. Then, I waited. 3 days later, the news crashed into the palace like a tidal wave. A battle at the Sunken Gorge. Goran and Rorik's forces had clashed in a bloody, confused melee. Both alphas were dead, slain by each other's hand. Their clans were now leaderless, tearing themselves apart in internal strife. The court was in an uproar. Caspian was livid, confused, roaring about incompetence and betrayal. He couldn't understand it. He had given no such orders. I kept my head down, scrubbing a floor, hiding a smile in the suds. Phase 1 was complete. The full moon was in 2 days. A traditional time for a pack gathering. Caspian, seeking to reassert control, announced a summit. He summoned the 5 most powerful remaining clan leaders, the inner circle of the betrayal. This was my moment. The night before the summit, I enacted the final, most dangerous part of the plan. Using my knowledge of the guard rotations, I slipped into the abandoned scriptorium. With a steady hand born of 8 years of pent-up fury, I forged 5 more letters. Each was identical. Each was from Caspian to a different clan leader. And each contained a devastating, personal betrayal. To the leader of the Silvermane clan, after we dispose of the others, the treacherous Boulderback lands will be yours, as promised. To the leader of the Boulderback clan, the Silvermane's weakness is their reliance on the river. Poison it, and they are yours. I detailed their secret shames, their hidden plots against each other, all things I'd gleaned from Caspian's boastful pillow talk or from the documents in his chest. I forged his seal with painstaking care. I then slipped into the meeting hall and placed each letter on the respective alpha's chair just before dawn. The summit began at noon. Caspian sat at the head of the table, arrogant, trying to project control. The 5 clan leaders filed in, their faces grim. They found the letters. I was there, of course. Pouring wine. Invisible. I watched as the Boulderback Alpha read his letter. His face darkened to a thunderous purple. He looked up at the Silvermane Alpha, who was staring at his own letter with naked shock and rage. "You snake!" The Boulderback Alpha roared, leaping to his feet and pointing at the Silvermane leader. "You planned to poison our water. And you conspired to steal my birthright." The Silvermane leader shot back, brandishing his own damning letter. Chaos erupted. Accusations flew like knives. Caspian stood, bellowing for order, but his voice was lost in the storm. They turned on him, waving the letters in his face, screaming about his betrayal. "You gave us all the same promises." One yelled. "You played us against each other." Another snarled. They saw the proof in their hands. They saw the identical seals. Their own greed and paranoia did the rest. They didn't need me to convince them. They convinced themselves. Steel was drawn. The Great Hall, the seat of Alistair's dream of unity, became a slaughterhouse. The 5 most powerful alphas in the land, along with their guards, turned on each other with brutal efficiency. Caspian, trying to intervene, was caught in the whirlwind. I saw a blade, wielded by the enraged Silvermane Alpha, slash across his arm. He roared in pain and fury, retreating behind his guards. I did not stay to watch the end. My work was done. While the beasts tore each other apart, I walked calmly to the throne room. Anya and a few other loyal servants were waiting. They had prepared a basin of water and the least ragged of my old dresses. I washed the grime from my face and hands. I let them comb the tangles from my hair. I had no crown. So, with a steady hand, I took a handful of winter roses from a vase, their thorns sharp and unforgiving, and twisted them into a circlet. Then, I walked to the great throne of the Southern Empire, the throne of my husband, and I sat down. The thorned crown bit into my brow, a tiny pinprick of pain. I welcomed it. It was real. It was mine. I could hear the sounds of battle dying down in the hall outside. Soon, the doors would open. Soon, he would come. I arranged my ragged dress around me, a queen in pauper's clothes, and waited for the king to return to his court. Chapter 8, The Empress Returns. I did not reclaim my throne with an army at my back, but with a crown of flowers and a web of lies so perfect, they became the truth. Silence. It was the silence after the storm. The brutal cacophony from the great hall had faded, replaced by the moans of the wounded and the ominous, heavy quiet of death. The air that seeped under the throne room doors was thick with the coppery tang of blood. I sat on the cold, familiar stone of the throne. The rose-crowned thorns were a sharp, clarifying pain against my skin, an anchor to this moment. My heart was not pounding, it was beating a slow, steady, inexorable drumbeat of finality. 8 years of suffering, of planning, of sacrifice, had led to this precipice. There was no fear left. Only certainty. The grand doors shuddered, then burst open. Caspian stood there, framed in the doorway. His fine clothes were torn and splattered with gore. A deep gash on his arm wept blood onto the floor. His face was a mask of fury, confusion, and triumph, the look of a man who has just survived a battle he doesn't understand. Behind him was a remnant of his personal guard, perhaps 20 men, and his wife, Elara, her face pale and terrified, clinging to his arm. His eyes swept the empty throne room, then found me. The confusion on his face was almost comical. It took him a full 3 seconds to process the image, me, the slave, sitting on his throne, wearing a crown of flowers amidst the eerie silence of his victory. His expression shifted from confusion to disbelief, then to a cold, dawning rage. What is the meaning of this? His voice boomed, echoing in the vast space. Get off that throne, you mad creature, before I have you flayed alive. I did not move. I simply tilted my head, the picture of a queen considering a mildly interesting insect. The throne, I said, my voice calm and clear, carrying effortlessly in the silent hall, has always been mine. You were merely keeping it warm. Elara found her voice, a shrill, nervous thing. Caspian, just have the guards drag her out. She's insane. Am I? I asked, my gaze locking on Caspian. Was it insanity that forged your seal? Was it madness that wrote letters to Goran and Rorik, playing on their greed and turning them against each other in the sunken gorge? Caspian's bloodied face went slack with shock. You. Was it the raving of a madwoman, I continued, my voice dropping to a conversational, terrifyingly intimate tone, that uncovered your little chest of secrets? The treaties you never intended to honor? The promises to the Silvermane clan that directly contradicted your promises to the Boulderbacks? I saw the blood drain from his face. He took a step back, as if physically pushed. Impossible. And was it insanity, I whispered, the words hanging in the air like an executioner's blade, that spent 7 nights in your bed, exhausting you, learning your secrets, and stealing everything you held dear while you snored? The revelation hit him like a physical blow. The ultimate humiliation. He hadn't conquered me, he had been my pawn, my dupe. His mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. The guards around him shifted uneasily, their loyalty wavering as they witnessed their alpha's utter unraveling. "You," he finally choked out, his voice strangled with pure, incandescent hatred. "You treacherous whore. I will tear you apart with my bare hands." He took a raging step forward. That was his mistake. I didn't even raise my voice. I simply said, "Now." It was the signal. From the high gallery, from behind pillars, from the shadows of the upper balconies, arrows hissed. They did not strike Caspian. They struck his guard. It was over in seconds. A silent, deadly rain of projectiles. His 20 loyal men fell without a single cry, thudding to the marble floor like sacks of grain. The archers were my loyalists, Hemlock's nephews, Anya's brothers, men and women who had lost everything to Caspian's reign and had waited years for this moment. Caspian and Alara stood alone amidst a circle of their dead protectors. The arrogance finally shattered, replaced by raw, animal fear. Alara began to sob hysterically. I rose from the throne. The movement was fluid, regal. I descended the dais steps, my ragged dress swirling around my ankles. I stopped before them. "You killed my husband in his sickbed," I said, my voice cold and flat. "You enslaved his mate. You betrayed every wolf who ever trusted you. You sought to build an empire on lies and bones." I looked at Alara, who cringed away from me. "And you," I said, "you delighted in cruelty. You found joy in the suffering of those you deemed beneath you." I turned to the shadows. Anya. The scullery maid stepped forward, her face set in lines of grim vengeance. In her hands, she held a bucket of the same filthy, freezing water I had been forced to scrub with for 8 years. "The former queen has a thirst," I said softly. Anya did not hesitate. She threw the bucket's contents directly into Alara's face. The woman spluttered, gasping, her fine clothes soaked through with greasy, foul water. She collapsed to her knees, weeping in shame and shock. I turned my attention back to Caspian. The great Alpha, the conqueror, was trembling. "For your crimes against the crown, against this pack, and against my family," I pronounced, my voice ringing with absolute authority, "the sentence is death." I did not give the order to the archers. I looked past Caspian, to the doorway where old man Hemlock stood, a heavy, executioner's axe in his grizzled hands. He was not a soldier. He was a stable master. And he was the most loyal subject a queen could ask for. Caspian followed my gaze, his eyes widening in terror. He understood. This would not be a clean, military execution. This would be personal. "Hold him," I said. 2 burly stable hands, the same ones who had carried my letters, stepped forward and grabbed Caspian's arms, forcing him to his knees. Hemlock walked forward, the axe dragging on the stone. His eyes met mine, and I gave a single, slow nod. There was no grand speech. No final words. There was only the whistling sound of the axe falling, and a wet, final thud. And then, silence. I looked down at the head of the man who had stolen my life. There was no triumph in that moment. Only a vast, echoing emptiness. The debt had been paid. The vengeance was complete. But the war was not over. I turned to the few courtiers and servants who had gathered, drawn by the commotion, their faces pale with shock and awe. "The throne of the Southern Empire is reclaimed," I announced, my voice once again clear and strong. "Let it be known that Michelle, Luna of Alistair the Visionary, now rules. The time of tyrants is over." A few hesitant cheers went up, growing quickly into a roar. But my mind was already moving forward, past the cleanup, past the consolidation of power. 17 clans had betrayed us. 5 were now leaderless, their alphas dead by my design in the Great Hall. Caspian was dead. That left 11. 11 kingdoms that needed to be brought to heel. Not through assassination, but through undeniable, overwhelming force. I had the will. I had the right. And now, I had a throne. But I needed an army. And I knew exactly where to get one. Chapter 9, The Irresistible Offer. I did not ask the Lycan king for an army. I offered him the one thing he could never refuse, the permanent elimination of every rival who kept him awake at night. The aftermath of a coup is a fragile, bloody thing. For 3 days, the palace was a controlled chaos of cleansing. Caspian's most loyal guards were rooted out and offered a choice: pledge fealty to the returned Luna or join their alpha in the afterlife. Most chose wisely. The bodies of the traitorous alphas were returned to their clans with a simple, stark message: the betrayer Caspian and his co-conspirators are dead. The Southern Empire is reclaimed by its rightful ruler, Luna Michelle. You will receive terms of surrender presently. The messages were not bluster. They were facts. The clans, now leaderless and reeling from the sudden, violent reversal, would be confused, frightened, and ripe for division. But I had no illusions. Fear would only keep them in check for so long. Soon, new alphas would rise, angrier and more determined to avenge their fallen predecessors. I needed to break them completely. And for that, I needed a hammer. My son's last letter had contained more than just hope, it contained the final piece of the puzzle. The Northern King is a hard man, but just. He sees my worth, not my name. King Lysander. The Lycan ruler. His power was legendary, but as my studies had revealed, it was constrained. The 11 remaining clans that had followed Caspian acted as a buffer, a constant thorn in his side. They paid nominal tribute but fostered banditry on his borders, challenged his trade routes, and drained his resources with their constant, petty squabbling. They were a shield for Caspian and a migraine for Lysander. To move against them directly would be seen as aggression, uniting them against a common enemy. He needed a casus belli. A reason. I would hand it to him, wrapped in a bow. Sitting at Alistair's old desk, my desk, I composed 2 letters. The first was to my son, Leo. It was coded, using phrases from the letters we'd exchanged. My lion heart. The thorned crown is fitted, though it bites. The garden is weeded, but the outer walls are still thick with brambles. It is time to make our proposal to the northern sun prepare the ground. I come not as a supplicant, but as a partner offering a clear sky. The second letter was to King Lysander himself. It took me hours to draft. Every word was chosen with the precision of a surgeon's scalpel. I used the formal, diplomatic language I had mastered in the dust of the scriptorium. I wrote not on parchment, but on vellum. I used the official seal of the Southern Empire, my seal, now. To His Majesty, Lysander, King of the Northern Lycans. I write to you not from a position of weakness, but from one of renewed strength. I am Michelle, Luna of the Southern Empire, widow of Alistair the Visionary, and rightful ruler of these lands. The usurper, Caspian, and the core of his treacherous cabal have been dealt with. Justice has been served for the murder of my mate and the betrayal of our shared peace. However, the peripheral clans that supported him remain, the Boulderbacks, the Silvermans, the Blackwoods, and others. They are leaderless, lawless, and ferment instability on both our borders. They are a threat to the trade routes you value and a drain on the resources of both our kingdoms. I propose an alliance. Not of marriage. Not of subjugation. But of mutual benefit. I will grant you the casus belli you require. I will publicly condemn these clans as outlaws and enemies of the Southern Crown. I will open my borders to your armies, granting them safe passage and full logistical support. Together, we will crush them. Their territories will be dissolved. Their resources will be split evenly between our kingdoms. Their people will be integrated or exiled. In return, I ask only for your military partnership in this single, decisive campaign. The result will be a secure, stable southern border for you, free from the nuisance of these rogue elements, and a unified, peaceful empire for me. I will be at the neutral grounds of the stone bridge in 1 week's time to discuss terms. I will bring a small guard. I trust you will do the same. Consider the alternative, a prolonged civil war on your doorstep, which will inevitably spill over into your lands and cost you far more in blood and treasure. The choice is pragmatic, Your Majesty. I await your response. I sent the letter by the fastest rider, under a flag of truce. The response came in 2 days. It was a single line, written in a harsh, angular script. I will be at the stone bridge. Lysander. The meeting was a masterpiece of political theater. I arrived not in rags, but in a simple, dark gray gown, elegant, severe, and speaking of mourning rather than poverty. My thorned crown was my only jewelry. I was accompanied by Old Man Hemlock and 2 of his steadiest sons. We looked lean, hardened, and serious. Lysander was exactly as described, a mountain of a man, his face a roadmap of old scars, his eyes the pale, cold blue of winter ice. He was flanked by 4 immense Lecan guards, their aura of power making the very air crackle. He dispensed with pleasantries. Your letter was direct. There is no time for anything else, Your Majesty, I replied, my voice steady. We both have kingdoms to secure. You offer me a war on a platter. I offer you a solution to a problem. You can spend the next decade putting out the brush fires these clans start, or you can help me burn out the root system in 1 season. He studied me, his gaze unervingly intense. And if I simply take your territory after helping you secure it? You would have spent my armies for me. I met his gaze without flinching. You could try. But you would not be fighting broken clans. You would be fighting a unified empire, on its home ground, led by a Luna who has already toppled 1 alpha far more cunning than your strategists give me credit for. The cost would be catastrophic. Or, I paused, letting the alternative hang in the air. You can have a secure southern border, a grateful ally, and a prosperous trade partner for the next century. The math is simple. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. It was not a warm expression. You speak like a king. I learned from the best. He was silent for a long time, his eyes scanning the horizon as if he could see the future laid out before him. He saw the same thing I did, a quick, profitable war that eliminated a chronic problem, versus a long, costly struggle with an uncertain outcome. The resources will be split 60-40, he said finally. In my favor. For my logistical support. I didn't blink. 50-50. My intelligence and open borders are the key that unlocks this victory. Without them, you have no casus belli and a war on 2 fronts. With them, you have a tidy profit. 50-50. He stared at me, and I saw a new emotion in those icy eyes, respect. He had expected a grieving widow, a desperate woman. He found a fellow ruler. Done, he grunted. He extended a hand, calloused and scarred. It swallowed mine whole, but my grip was firm. The pact was sealed not with a kiss, but with a handshake. A business arrangement between 2 powers who understood the language of leverage. As we parted, he looked back at me. Your son, he said. He is a fine warrior. He never spoke his name, but he carries his father's bearing. And it seems, his mother's mind. My heart swelled with a pride so fierce it brought tears to my eyes, which I did not shed. I simply nodded. Tell him his mother is coming home. And she is bringing peace. I turned and walked away, the weight of the coming war on my shoulders, but the certainty of victory in my heart. The Empress had not begged for an army. She had hired one, and paid for it with her enemy's land. Chapter 10, The Thorned Crown. Vengeance is not a single act of violence, it is the patient, careful construction of a new world from the wreckage of the old. And I am its architect. The war with the remaining clans was not a war. It was a surgical excision. With the borders of the Southern Empire thrown open to them, Lysander's Lecan legions poured south like a force of nature. They were not an invading horde, they were a scalpel wielded with brutal precision. My intelligence, the maps, the troop movements, the clan vulnerabilities I had spent years memorizing, guided their every strike. We did not fight battles. We delivered verdicts. The clans, already fractured and leaderless, were surrounded, isolated, and dismantled. Some alphas, seeing the inevitable, knelt in the mud and swore fealty to the returned Luna on the spot. Others, proud and stupid, chose to fight. They and their loyalists were erased. The message was clear, the old way of betrayal and ambition was over. A new order had arrived, and it was unforgiving. Within 3 months, it was done. The 11 clans were broken. Their territories were absorbed, their warriors integrated into my new army or Lysander's, their people given a choice, pledge loyalty to the unified empire or be exiled. Lysander, true to his word, took his 50% of the spoils, land, treasure, warriors, and withdrew back north. Our transaction was complete. We were not friends, but we were respectful rivals, bound by a mutually beneficial deal and a healthy dose of mutual wariness. The day the last clan surrendered, I stood on the battlements of my palace, and looked out over an empire that was finally, truly, at peace. The air no longer smelled of fear and conspiracy. It smelled of pine and possibility. But the silence in my own chambers was deafening. I had won. I had my vengeance. I had my crown. But the throne room felt vast and empty. The weight of the thorned crown was a constant, aching reminder of the price I had paid. I had built a fortress around my heart to survive, and now I was a prisoner inside it. I thought the final battle would fill the void Alistair had left. It only made it deeper. A week later, a lone rider was spotted approaching the palace. He flew no banner, but he sat his horse with the easy grace of a born warrior. The guards tensed, but I felt it, a pull, a faint, familiar hum in my blood that I had thought forever silenced. The mate bond was not gone. It had been stretched to its limit, a thread of gold stretched across continents, but it was still there. I walked out into the main courtyard, my heart hammering against my ribs. I wore a simple gown of royal blue, and the thorned crown. I would meet my future as I had become, an empress, scarred but standing. The rider dismounted. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with a confidence that belied his youth. He pulled off his helmet. And I saw Alistair's eyes looking back at me from a younger, beardless face. My breath caught. It was like seeing a ghost step into the sun. Leo. He was no longer the baby I had wept for. He was a man. A king in waiting. For a long moment, we just stared at each other, across the cobblestones and the years. The court and the guards held their breath. Then, he did something that shattered the last of my icy control. He did not bow. He did not kneel. He walked forward, his steps sure and steady, and stopped before me. His eyes, so like his father's, took in the crown of thorns, the lines of hardship on my face, the strength in my posture. Tears welled in his eyes, but he did not look away. "Mother," he said, his voice deep and steady, but laced with an emotion so raw it shook me to my core. "Your letters, they kept me alive." The dam broke. A sob I had been holding for 8 years tore from my throat. I reached for him, and he folded me into an embrace that was all solid, sure strength. I clung to him, my son, my lionheart, the living embodiment of Alistair's greatest dream. I wept for the years lost, for the pain endured, for the husband stolen. But I also wept with a fierce, triumphant joy. He was here. He was home. We had survived. He pulled back, his hands on my shoulders, and looked at the crown. "You wear thorns," he observed, his voice thick. "They remind me that beauty and pain often grow from the same stem," I said, my voice raspy. "And that a crown is not given. It is grown, and it is earned." A smile, so like his father's, touched his lips. "Then it suits you." That night, we sat before the fire in the royal chambers, our chambers. I told him everything. Not the sanitized version for a son, but the brutal truth for a future king. I spoke of the betrayal, the enslavement, the despair. And I spoke of the 7 nights, the sacrifice that had bought our victory. He listened, his face a mask of grim understanding. When I finished, he was silent for a time, staring into the flames. "He would be proud of you," he said finally. "Not just for winning, but for the cost you were willing to pay for your people. For me." I lost myself, I whispered, the admission finally freed in his presence. "No," he said, turning to me, his father's wisdom in his young eyes. "You found a stronger version. The version the world needed you to be." The next day, we held a true coronation. Not for me. For us. Under the open sky, before the entire assembled pack and the remnants of the court, I stood before my son. "The empire was your father's dream," I announced, my voice carrying to the farthest wolf. "But a dream is not a legacy. A legacy is built. It is fought for. It is protected." I turned to Leo. "Kneel." He knelt before me, head bowed. I did not remove the thorn crown. Instead, I took a new crown, forged from silver and inlaid with a single, flawless ruby, the color of courage, the color of blood, the color of love. I placed it on his head. "I give you Leo, son of Alistair the visionary and Michelle the steadfast," I cried out. "Your Alpha King. I have fought to give him this throne. Now, I will stand beside him to protect it." The roar of approval that shook the very foundations of the palace was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. Later, alone in the garden where my old life had ended and my new one had begun, I finally allowed myself to breathe. The ghosts were still there, Alistair's smile, the scent of jasmine, the memory of pain. But they were just that now. Memories. They no longer held me captive. Leo found me there. He stood beside me, silent for a moment, looking out at the empire we would now rule together. "It is done," he said. "No," I replied, a faint, true smile finally touching my lips. I looked at him, my son, my king, my future. "It is just beginning." The wild had called to me once, and I had answered. I had been broken, enslaved, and forged anew in the fires of betrayal. I had become a queen of whispers, a general of shadows, a mistress of thorns. And now, finally, I was home. The end.